back to torment us. The breach you failed to fix today will fall upon your children. So I'm asking you to give it all you got, give it all you got, give it all you got. I'm asking you to give it all you got, give it all you got, give it all you got. Lawmakers, judiciary, executive, political parties. Now all of us be government, social groups, you and I, CSO, and the
Hello and welcome. You were listening to Nigerian artist Sil with the song All You Got, helping me to welcome you to this special edition of the HagueTalks to mark World Press Freedom Day. I'm Michelle Ernstein from RNW Media, and we're the co-organizers of today's event. RNW Media builds digital communities for social change. So we engage with millions of young people around the world on the issues that are most important to them, helping them get reliable information on a whole range of issues, including, of course, at this time, COVID-19. Our topic today is how can we make our voices heard during the COVID-19 crisis? And the we that we're referring to are the media, our activists, and also citizens. So you and I, how can we make our voices heard? Now, before we get into the meat of this whole discussion, we're going to go through a few logistics if you're watching us on Zoom or on YouTube Live. And you're also, like me, in isolation somewhere in the world. We're all together in this shared experience, and you're probably also pretty zoomed out and webinared out at this time. So we decided to rise to the challenge and, feel your pain, share your pain, try and make this as interactive as possible. So we have 4 ways you can interact today. You can ask a question, so you can pop a question in the Q&A, click the icon at the bottom of your screen. So if you're listening to a speaker, you want to ask a question, put it in there. Don't use the chats. The chats are where you can find additional information about all the speakers. And we're also going to share links to their work while you're listening to them. You can also raise your hand. So if you want to respond to something a speaker is saying, raise your hand and you can speak directly to them. We won't see you in your pajamas, but we will hear your voice, I hope. And you can also ask questions via polls. Polls are great. They're like pub quizzes, but there are no wrong answers. So everybody's a winner. I hope you take part in the polls. Now, the HagueTalks, as the name implies, is based in the city of The Hague, peace and justice. But the issues and the participants are truly global. And we're going to test that now by going to our first poll. We're also going to test our first poll with you, so I hope you join in. You should be seeing that coming up on your screen. We're asking you, where are you right now? Where are you? So you've got a list of continents in front of you: Africa, Asia, Australia, Europe, North America, South America. Click the relevant one and hit submit. And then we can see who we have with us today. I know we have a lot of HagueTalk past speakers from Mexico, from Iraq, from South Africa, from a range of places. Okay, we've got our results. Okay, 61% of people are joining us from Europe, but we have a number of people from Africa, 22%, late birds coming in from Asia, and in North America, a couple of early birds joining us, 8%. That's great. We have good representation. I think some people are going to be joining us from South America, maybe a little bit later on. So we also have a second poll for you, and the second poll is going to help us to frame the event. So you'll see that coming up now, because we want to ask you, what do you think is the most serious issue the world faces today? Is it inequality? Is it poverty, food and water security, ongoing wars, conflicts, climate change, coronavirus, or other? Maybe you think sexual health and rights. Maybe there's some other issue. So click which you think is the most serious issue the world faces today. When you've done that, hit submit. And we'll see what you have to say about what you think are the most pressing issues. Okay, inequality is the leader, followed by poverty, very closely linked. Food insecurity, ongoing wars, climate change, coronavirus. We have a pretty even spread, and some people who said other. This is telling us There are a lot of people with a lot of issues out there, and maybe you're not hearing them being talked about at this time. And again, to go back, our topic today is how can we make our voices heard on these and a whole other range of issues during the COVID-19 crisis. So as we mark World Press Freedom Day this year, there is only one topic dominating our media, dominating our conversations. And I'm sure when you get to the end of this webinar and you open your WhatsApps again, you're going to have, like me, about 15,000 silly memes, right? There has been a tsunami of information and misinformation about this issue. Now, the WHO has referred to this as an infodemic, and some people think that it might be even more harmful than the pandemic itself, which is an extraordinary thing to say. But what the infodemic causes is anxiety, potentially harmful behaviors. And it also undermines trust in key institutions like the WHO, like the media. And I think we've seen that in action in the past weeks. And meanwhile, as we saw from the poll, a whole range of other issues continue to unfold, and the media is really squeezed, censored, pressed in its ability to be able to cover these issues effectively. So again, how can we, media activists and citizens, make our voices heard? We have three great speakers for you today. Joining us is Mira Milosevic, the head of the Global Forum for Media Development. There she is. Hello, Mira. We also have Shakira Chinara, a member of the African Union Youth Advisory Council. She's a public health practitioner and an activist. Hello, Shakira.
It's brilliant to join you, Michelle, and everyone who's tuning in today.
Wonderful. And we also have Sudhi Kanal, who's the Program and Learning Manager at Accountability Labs Nepal office. So each of our guests is going to tell you in about 5 minutes how they are responding to the infodemic from their experience. And then we're going to open up for your questions that you can pop into the Q&A. But before we do that, we're going to go into one more poll. And this poll is about the media. And what do you think? What is the most important role of the media during the COVID-19 pandemic? Is it to provide people with reliable public health information? Is it to cover all of the news, not just COVID news? Is it to hold the government to account? Or is it all of the above? Click the most relevant and hit submit. Here we go, results coming in. I love the poll. All of the above. Okay, we don't expect a lot of media, do we? No, we don't. Okay, wonderful. So turning to our first guest, who describes herself as a journalist at heart, but now Mira Milosevic heads the Global Fund for Media Development, and that's a network of more than 190 organizations advocating for the sustainability of journalism and news media. They're right now on the front lines helping a lot of different organizations get through this COVID-19 crisis. So a warm HagueTalks welcome to you, Mira Milosevic.
Thank you very much, Michelle, and thanks everyone who's joining us today. It's a pleasure to be here with you and our panelists. As many of you today, I'm looking for different sources of information. And over the last couple of weeks, of course, I've read a lot of things, but one caught my eye, and it was a link to an article published in 2018 about how epidemiologists, disease detectives, as they call themselves, use local news to track the spread of infectious illnesses such as mumps, for instance, or flu. And I never thought about local media from that perspective, but thinking back to my beginnings as a local journalist in a town of 40,000 people, it made sense. My colleagues at that time when I was starting knew everything about what was happening in that small town. That they knew how many local cases of flu there were in the health center at that point. They knew prices of the food in the local farmers market, and they knew who died at a local care home that day. And that is probably a familiar picture that many of you remember from your countries and your communities. For instance, in India, you were not married if that hasn't been published in a local newspaper. And in many African countries, local radios are integral part of communities and communication there. Unfortunately, over the last 20 years, the sustainability model for local journalism has been in a serious decline. We have the information that around 60 billion, more than a half of all the advertising revenues, have been lost over the last 20 years on an annual basis for all news media. For local media, we estimate that on an annual basis, we lost around $6 billion in annual revenues every year. That means that we probably have at least 50% of local journalists less today than we had 20 years ago. And that was the trend of decline before this pandemic started. Now, if we fast forward to 2020 and the COVID-19 crisis, what we are seeing is also a very difficult situation for local news and local newsrooms. What we are seeing that 75% of those, for instance, in the UK, report that they might be temporarily or permanently closing. Around 2/3 of all the journalists worldwide in 77 countries just recently surveyed report that they're facing revenue, job losses, canceled commissions, or worsening working conditions, not to mention different pressures that they're facing both from governments and other powerful centers. So while this is happening, there is another story that we are seeing these days, that the most vulnerable people in communities are actually those most affected by COVID-19. And unfortunately, those are the people that with loss of local news and local reporters are losing their voices. And we will hear one of the examples from my panelists, one excellent examples. But for instance, here in Europe, we are seeing and hearing the news that in European countries, between 42 and 57% of all deaths have been in care homes and retirement homes. And these are those mostly affected who are not having voices and local reporters. Imagine if we had local reporters, how this picture would look like and whether we could have prevented this. So this is an amplified trend that we have seen over the last 20 years. And we at Global Forum for Media Development today on 3rd of May, World Press Freedom Day, have worked with more than 80 civil society, press freedom, media support, journalism support organizations, and networks to draw attention to the fact that we are not facing only a decline in sustainability model for journalism. We are actually potentially seeing a complete stop to local news journalism ecosystems if we don't come up with alternative models for their financing, for their support, for their sustainability. So we are launching today an emergency appeal for support from all of those in power and all of those who can for emergency support to news media and journalism. And finally, this is something that we are looking at not only in the context of COVID-19, but also in the context of what happens later. What happens after? And this is a big question for all of us, and this is a big question for you as well. What kind of societies would we like to see after this is all over? What kind of societies that would prevent situations like this from happening again? We believe that these societies that we would like to see, better societies, need to include news media, journalism, or information systems that would include voices of all, not just those who are loud. So we invite you all to work together in joint forces to imagine and reimagine the world of the future that will include justice, peace, and inclusive societies.
Thank you so much, Mira Milosevic. And if you're just joining us, this is a special edition of the Hague Talks to mark World Press Freedom Day. And our question today is, how can we make our voices heard during the COVID-19 pandemic? And Mira was talking about the media in particular. So I'm just looking to see if we have any questions. We do have one from Nina Werner. Nina's asking, Mira, do you see a role for citizens to support the media at this time?
Yes, as I said, one of the things that is happening is that we are seeing that media and journalists are working closer with their communities, and at the same time, communities don't feel only as audiences anymore, but they feel as part of the story and increasingly as part of the newsroom. So yes, we are seeing this is probably a future that we are looking at.
Great. And one participant, Bonnie Tree, is asking, can you share links to your research? So maybe you can do that afterwards.
Well,
share it in
yes.
the chats. That would be really helpful. And maybe another point that's come up, someone mentioned that, people don't trust the media anymore. So what is the role of the media in reestablishing that trust?
It's an interesting one. We are seeing a lack of trust in institutions. And this is a trend across the world, and in majority of countries that trust is below 50%. But we're not seeing lack of trust in community journalism, especially if that journalism has name and a surname. And there is a difference now between trusting in media in general, than trusting national big conglomerate media, or trusting your local community media as opposed to trusting social networks. So we're actually seeing increasing trust in professional journalism, especially local.
Okay, so looking forward at that changed world and maybe the silver lining that we might pull from this, what would that look like for you, Mira?
Well, it would look like something that I called human rights and press freedom by design or default. And also just economic systems by default. I truly believe that we need to see a different economic approach and a different approach to all our society that's based on equal opportunities and also human rights.
Thank you so much, Mira Milosevic. So now we are going to move on to another poll. We've just heard about the role of media during the pandemic. Now we're going to look at the role of citizens. What do we think citizens should do? Mira talked about the fact that citizens and media are teaming up to a certain extent. So you've got a poll in front of you, and the options are, do you think citizens should identify problems, things like corruption, domestic violence? Should they report misinformation when they come across it? Should they share verified information? Or should they do none of the above? Click the answer which is most relevant to you and submit. Okay, everybody's thinking, you're mulling it over. Okay, you think that the top role should be that you should be identifying problems, but also sharing verified information. Interesting that citizens should be the source of verified information. And nobody said none of the above, which is great, because our next guest thinks that citizens should be doing all three of these things. Soni Kanal is the Program and Learning Manager at Accountability Lab in the Nepal office. And if you recall, at the start of the show, we heard a piece of music from Nigerian artist Sil called All You've Got. And that song was about encouraging citizens to take an active role in shaping their societies. The song won the Accountability Music Award, sponsored by Accountability Lab. And Soni's going to join us today to tell us more about the role of citizens and the role they can play in Nepal during the infodemic and how her team is supporting them. A warm Hague Talk welcome to Soni Kanal.
Thank you, Michelle. Hello, everyone. I'm currently speaking from my home in Kathmandu, Nepal, and I could see you all are from different parts of the world. What was your first reaction when you heard about COVID-19 pandemic? For me, it was something that was happening next doors because Nepal shares a northern border with China. Like other countries in the world, Nepal was also not very prepared for the COVID-19 pandemic. And the government of Nepal decided to take action by imposing a lockdown from March 24th. Yes, you heard it right. It was only from March 24th when the government of Nepal started taking visible actions. Until then, there were lots of rumors spreading all across the country. Rumors such as Nepal is a corona-free country. Nepalese are immune to coronavirus. Drinking turmeric water with garlic can prevent the transmission, so on and so forth. You can imagine the level of harm this misinformation could do. Adding to that, this misinformation was being spread by popular people in social media, including the people from ministries. Our team at Accountability Lab Nepal was closely monitoring the situation, and we really felt that it is essential for citizens to get validated information from the government. This was not the first time Nepal was hit by a crisis. Just 5 years ago, Nepal was hit by a series of massive earthquakes where almost 9,000 people died. And after the earthquake, the misinformation that followed created an equal havoc. At that time, our team quickly mobilized our existing volunteers and collected the rumors and concerns from the communities and fed back validated information to the community. However, the situation is not same during the pandemic because the whole country is in lockdown. However, with the relationships that we've built on ground over the years, there are youth leaders from various sectors, including media, who want to support us in this process. They are tracking their own social media. They are making phone calls to the people who are not able to have access to internet and sending rumors and concerns to us, the core team at Kathmandu. The team at Kathmandu, which has access to phone calls and which has access to the internet, can validate this information by calling government personnel and also doing a lot of desk research. We validate this information and disseminate it back to the communities. Not to forget to mention this, we prepare a series of bulletins, which we call citizen insiders. As you can see in the picture, we make it very easy to understand. Like we have pictures, we have infographics, and we prepare this in local languages so it is accessible to all. We send this back to the communities through our networks and also by publishing it in local radios so that people can hear this information. And this bulletins or citizen insiders does not only consist of debunking the rumors, it also consists of the stories, real stories from the ground, which are unheard. When I bring you to Kathmandu, Kathmandu is a capital city of Nepal, which hosts a lot of migrant workers, including the people who work on day-to-day wage. For instance, people who are working on construction sites. These people, after the lockdown, have lost their jobs and also have lost their income. So they have no hope and no choice except for going back to their homes. One such group of laborers, there were 17 laborers who decided to go back to their home in Western Nepal from Kathmandu. These people walked for 7 days, 575 kilometers, surviving on dry noodles and surviving on water and sleeping outdoors to reach to their communities. One of the local journalists from our network picked up the story from them, and then he shared with us and then we shared it in our bulletins. This was the first time these migrant workers felt that their voices were heard. After that, this story was also picked up by a national media. Similar such stories started surfacing out because there are a lot of migrant workers who are opting for the same. Then government started taking some actions. Local government units started coordinating with federal and provincial government to take these migrant workers back home safely. So we could see if government and citizens have proper information, they can navigate the pandemic in responsible ways, which bolsters trust, which is really essential during the time of crisis. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Soni, very much. I'm Michelle Ernstine from RNW Media, and this is a special edition of the HagueTalks to mark World Press Freedom Day. Now we're going to go to questions for Soni. So if you have put questions in the Q&A, or if you want to do so now, you can also raise your hand if you want to respond directly to Soni. And Soni, what I found fascinating about that, thank you so much for sharing the visuals, as well as the story. But what is so interesting is that we're seeing the seamless link between citizens and media at this time. And it's really, not as we know it, media not as we know it, and citizen engagement not as we know it. And there's one question that has come in, which is about the protection of citizens, because citizens might be raising issues that are quite controversial at this point. So how do you facilitate them in doing that while keeping them safe?
Okay, at this point of time, when we are talking to the citizens, we are also looking at, whenever we get these rumors and concerns, we are not only focused on like individual concerns, but we look at the concerns that comes from groups. So we know what are the right informations and what are the wrong. So it's not only that we are validating those rumors, like, is the rumor actually spreading on the ground? That's also one question. So we are also tracking those, and we are actually ensuring if these are the correct rumors or concerns that are coming from the communities, because we have our networks there, who are helping us or supporting us.
Okay, and you also, you talked about misinformation. I think a lot of times citizens may not be aware that they're sharing misinformation. And, of course, culture might play a big role in how people interpret information. So how do you balance, the scientific, the public health information with people's own cultural references, and how they may be, using that as a lens through which to share their information?
Yeah, so when we get a lot of concerns from the communities, we actually we take into consideration that this myths can possibly exist there, and we try to see what are the scientific validated information that can come from that is scientific, that like the organizations which are working scientifically are saying, and we try to put this back to the community so that people should also understand that misinformation can also lead to their own harm, right? Yeah.
Thank you so much, Soni. And we're going to be hearing from Soni again later in the program. So if you have more questions for her, you can put them in the Q&A. But now we're going to move, we heard from citizens, we heard from the media, and now we're going to move to an activist, a youth activist. Now, young people around the world are often not invited to take part in decision-making. They're not invited to important conversations, despite the fact that they make up the majority of the population in a lot of countries around the world. And what compounds that is that research has shown that in times of crisis, response teams become, one, older and more male. So before we go to our next speaker, I have a question for you, another poll question popping up now. This is a very simple one for you to answer, or maybe it isn't, depends on your sensitivity. The question is, what age group are you in? Now, I know we've got a teenager listening because my son is out there, but please respond. What age group are you in? Hit submit so we can get a bit of an overview of who is with us today. Okay, we've got the results. Okay, most people are in their 30s. We have a good proportion of 20-year-olds. I'm delighted to see that. And then 50-year-olds. Oh, wow, we're up into our 70s as well. I love that. I love this. That really adds to our discussion today. So Shakira Chunara, our next speaker, is on the younger end of the scale. She's a member of the African Union Youth Advisory Council. Shakira got her PhD in public health when she was just 27 years old. She once said she hopes to put profit, gain, and power in the backseat and humanity in the front seat. Boom, Shakira, a very warm Hague Talks welcome to you.
Thank you, Michelle. It's brilliant to be both with you and your listeners. Getting into it, I first want to start off by giving a shout out to everyone, of course, but specifically Mira, because she highlighted the importance of community surveillance within pandemics. And I think that's such an important and very, very crucial point. I'm going to hop around for the next few minutes on different points, which I hope are very thought-provoking and spark our debate this Sunday afternoon. The first one, I think you gave me an introduction and said that I'm not a journalist by training and cognizant of this, but I have deep appreciation and gratitude joining in, and also for the discussion today, but also for the discipline itself. I may, and forgive me for using words like media, press, and journalism interchangeably as I go along. Very quickly, when I talk about freedom of press, and when I reflect on this, I really reflect on this as a young South African. And the reason I mention this is because South Africa, compared to the rest of the continent, in 1994, put in place one of the most progressive constitutions, which makes freedom of speech the gold in our society. It really has allowed us to remove a president that was ineffective. It bolsters our activism. And as a young person, it's so stark when I compare myself to colleagues on the rest of the continent. I, for example, am more able to speak out freely and advocate for issues compared to colleagues in other parts of the continent. And today, while I did some research for this, I came across the World Press Freedom Index, and it essentially shows how fragile sub-Saharan Africa is in terms of press freedom. We still have immense human rights abuses. So while we're able to celebrate a lot, we have a lot to still work towards. And this really brings me to the point about COVID-19 and what it's meant for journalism. In South Africa, for example, very early into the pandemic, we already saw credible media agencies having to either close down or face sustainability issues. Now, this for me it is a very concerning issue. And the reason I say this is because if the continent is suffering from poor press, poor media, a lack of accountability, a lack of transparency, what this also means is that the dissolution of the media, or the media being in jeopardy during these times, means that it's very possible for military states to start to take over. And for me, the media role is crucial on this continent in bringing transparency and accountability in these times, but also information. I'll then go on to bring a little bit of a creative element to this discussion. And it was interesting to learn that World Press Day is celebrated since 1993. Well, for me anyways, I'm from the field of public health. And within that, I got to read the Windhoek Declaration, which coined such a beautiful term. It really talks about UNESCO in 1989 saying that it's an art of expression, freedom of speech, and press or free press. It's the flow of images and words. Now, I just want that to settle in, the flow of images, words, and ideas. And I think on this World Press Day, we're also talking within the pandemic about traditional versus non-traditional media. And what does this mean? So the blogging, the TikTok videos, which are quite big as well, all used as sources of information. But one of my favorite was when I bought a packet of bread last week, they put COVID-19 information on the packet of bread. Now that is so powerful, because you're able to reach a large segment of the community, even those who traditionally may not be able to afford either data or newspapers, for example. I'm going to end off with, I suppose before I really end off, I want to share what's my favorite platform in the media, I suppose. And, you know, a lot of people expect that millennials don't pick up print and read a newspaper, but I love reading newspapers. And so I brought a little bit of a show and tell, which I doubt you'll be able to see, but I shall try. Anyways, this is one of my favorite articles. It's actually a tuk-tuk driver or tuk-tuk driver in India who decorated his tuk-tuk or his tuk-tuk, I'm not sure how you say that, with the coronavirus to scare people into staying at home. The other interesting piece, or the rich pieces that come out from print media, not that I'm being biased because I like it, was how the South African Autism Association wrote to the president of South Africa to say that measures such as lockdown means that people with autism and their caregivers cannot go outside. So I just wanted to highlight how the different things are reported, but what they also mean for issues of advocacy and issues of activism. I'm going to end off finally, as I promised, with 3 quick spark thoughts, I would say, and which I hope really elicits debate for this discussion, but very well into the future, given the different topics I discussed. The one is, and as Michelle rightly pointed out, we're seeing males dominate the media space in terms of expert opinions, decision makers, but we're also seeing an age gap of those who are considered experts and who are quoted in the media. The second issue is one that really drives anxiety within me. Now, I don't know if it's because health is my be end and end all, and I can sit and monitor trends all day long on coronavirus. But this also causes a little bit of anxiety. So how do we sift through this enormous amount of information which we are being presented with at the moment, in order to manage our lives, but also not really go down the anxiety and mental health route, which is, probably one we don't want to go through. And then the third one is interesting, and this is a little one that I hope sparks discussion. While we expect the press to be independent, and we also want sustainability, how do we ensure this, given the funding difficulties, who's funding the press, and ensuring this total independence? I'm going to pause and end up there. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Shakira. So I think we are just adjusting between cameras now. Wonderful to hear your views. Just to remind you, I'm Michelle Ernstine from RNW Media. This is a special edition of the HagueTalks to mark World Press Freedom Day. And we have a number of questions coming in for Shakira. One of the questions is, as we move into the digital space, as we are today on Zoom and YouTube Live, do you think this is going to be more helpful for young people and women to have a voice? Are there new opportunities that the digital space offers?
Definitely, Michelle. I think that already we know the impact of social media in our spaces as the younger generation, and how it's given us a voice, for example, in conferences, or how it's given us a voice where we're traditionally not given a voice to air our opinions. What it also means is that conferences will now become a lot more accessible, virtual spaces will be more accessible, and this will really bolster the inclusion of women and youth. But I do caution that we may also see an increase in cybersecurity issues and cyberbullying. Being an activist in this space, I've experienced cyberbullying when I speak out as well. So I just wanted to bring that perspective in as well.
Really important. And I just want to remind everybody, if you have a question for our speakers, please put them in the Q&A, but also raise your hand if you want to share a response. And I want to apologize to somebody who tried to share a response earlier. We didn't get to you quickly enough, so if you want to come back and share your response, please do so. But I also want to freestyle a little now. Shakira, you talked about, you know, to what extent emotions are connected with this and anxiety, people's anxieties now. And I think it's a really good idea to just check in and see how people are feeling. So I'm going to ask everybody to use your chat function now and just pop one word in the chat function to tell us how you are feeling now, just so we can get a little bit of a pulse on how people are on this Sunday afternoon, World Press Freedom Day. So you just have to wait for a moment to get people to open up their chats, put one word in that describes how you are feeling today. Okay, I'm not seeing anything come in. I'm going to give everybody a little more time to reflect on this. Do you know why this is happening? It's because we have the chat function, and then we also have a WhatsApp channel, and that's where things are being diverted into that for me. So we're using multiple channels now, and there could be a slight delay between the two. But so far, we're not seeing anything in chats. Okay, nobody wants to share today, and maybe that also tells us something about how people are feeling. Oh, puzzled. Somebody is puzzled. Okay, apprehensive. Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. Shakira, how are you feeling today?
I'm honestly tired of being under lockdown. So tired summarizes it. How about you, Michelle?
I think it's more a sense of resolve, acceptance. Maybe I've reached a new stage in all of this, but I'm feeling okay. I'm also feeling pretty charged, being live in this kind of setup, which is like a huge learning curve today. But we're seeing that some people, Guy Brager, he's inspired. We're seeing people who are positive, interested. Somebody else is locked up. Somebody else is excited. That's interesting to hear. I wonder what they're excited about. Curious. So isn't it fascinating? Quite a few reflective people inspired. We have more people who are inspired. One final question for you, Shakira. You mentioned the best practice around the packet of bread and the information, so new ways of getting information out. Are there other best practices that you can point to?
I'd love to talk about this, Michelle. So I'm featured on a network that journalists started more as a voluntary platform where they bring together female experts for the media space. And what this does is they put a collection or a database of female experts. It's called Quote This Woman Plus. And journalists around the world can access us on this database. And what it has done is put South African women who are experts into the media space during this pandemic. And I think it's brilliant, and I wish it could be rolled out worldwide.
Fantastic. Okay, we did have somebody else with his hand up. Fred Duho, do you want to put your hand up again? Because we can open up the mic and you can come on and share your response. I'm hoping he can do that. We're asking him to open his mic. Fred, okay, hopefully Fred will come back to us. Great, okay. So we've heard three perspectives from media, activists, and citizens. And now we're going to bring all of our speakers together again. So we're going to invite Mira Milosevic to join us again, and Suni Kanal. And we have questions for all of you, just as a summary. And we're also trying to, I'm just going to look and see what questions we have. From Blair, who I know is working with Accountability Lab. He's saying, great talk, Suni. And he has a question for you, Suni. Are there particular populations you are focusing on with the bulletins? Migrants, for example, or excluded groups?
Yes, we are also focusing on marginalized communities through our bulletins because we are sharing this information through social media of the people who are in communities. And we are also calling people who actually want information from us. So as phones are available to most of the people nowadays, we are also ensuring that this information reaches out to the communities, marginalized communities.
Great. Another question for you, Sunny, from Diana Eggleston. She's saying, have you seen any concrete actions or reactions being taken following your reporting of, sorry, the questions are vanishing too quickly now on my screen. I'm having to scroll up a little. There we go. Following your reporting of migrants' plight. So have you seen any concrete reaction when you went ahead and ran that intervention?
Yes, after a report was published and it was also highlighted by a national media, and there were also, it's not only us, but other media who are also covering the same news. And government, like local governments from various parts of the countries decided to take their citizens back home. So they, they informed their provincial government and federal government. So many domestic migrant workers could go back home for some bit of time, but it has been closed now.
Okay, and Sonny, sorry, you're getting another question now, so brace yourself. Jenny Tom wants to know who funds Accountability Lab and how can organizations such as yours ensure there's no bias in how they're sharing citizens' views?
Yeah, for us, when we are in organizations which are very open, and because we're working on accountability issues, we also deal with donors in similar ways. We tell them beforehand that what we are going to do is like really important. For instance, even though we were working on projects around migrant workers, for instance, but we have told the donors that this is a time of crisis and we really need to work on it, and they have agreed to us. So when we speak out, they also understand what's important.
Okay, thank you so much. And now we're going to open the mic and we're going to hear from Fred, who's going to give us his response. Fred, are you there? Can you raise your hand again and then we can open your mic? This is clearly one of those functionalities that is not as smooth as we would like it to be. No, okay, we're gonna wait again. We'll be patient, we'll be patient. For Mira, there's a question for you. What alternatives should local media journalists be looking for now while their jobs are threatened? Are there alternatives for them?
I mean, it's personal for everyone, but I think that their job is needed more than ever. And there are a lot of funding opportunities at the moment, and there hopefully will be in the future. So I think one of the things you should be looking at is working with your communities to see how you can continue to provide the crucial information that they need at the moment.
Great, thank you very much. So Fred is there. Fred, open your mic and we will give you the podium.
Hello, can you
there
hear
you
me?
are. Welcome. Fred, where are you joining us from?
I'm joining you from Ghana, West Africa.
Thank you so much for taking part today. Love it that you raised your hand. So what would you like to say?
Yeah, I would like to share a very brief perspective from the Ghanaian and the West African sub-region. Here in Ghana, at least, I would say the state is providing timely and accurate information. But the issue boils down to the fact that for the journalists to go out there to verify that information from the state is quite problematic. Why? Because whatever the state comes out with becomes more of the final say. There is no independent verification on the side of the journalist, because this pandemic really, we do not have that expertise to even engage the expert who will give you this knowledge as to the confirmed cases. These are the situations you have to look out for, but we look out for the state to give us the final response, and that is what we have to take as journalists. But one very interesting thing I find as a social media enthusiast is the fact that every bit of information with the journalists we gather, most of them are from social media. How do we verify this information to be true and accurate for us to use? Let me share my personal experience. I have followed the state officials, the president, I have followed the Ministry of Information, and a couple of other platforms I consider to be more accurate and timely for me to get information from. So anytime they post anything on social media, be it Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, quickly, I am among the very first to see those information, and I bring that timely information to my listeners and viewers on TV, radio, online. So I think social media is changing the way we're looking at things these days, and the way we need to appreciate and ought to utilize information going forward.
Thank you so much, Fred. Is there a question that you would like to put to one of our speakers, or are you just curious to hear their response to this? I think they all probably have something to say.
They've all shared very interesting perspective, but the issue with me is the fact that social media is not being explored enough. I would like to find out. I asked the earlier question about what becomes of the journalists when their jobs become threatened, because when you speak about Africa and specifically Ghana, the local media houses are struggling to survive even prior to this pandemic. So the question then becomes of how do these journalists survive when this pandemic is over? Their jobs are threatened, their livelihood are threatened, they have families they look up to, and everything. So how do we survive post COVID-19 situations? Our jobs are on the line. What do we do? What differently must we do as journalists to survive after this pandemic? Because advertising is not coming to the organization for them to even pay us. They are laying off people already. We've not gotten through yet. Ghana hasn't gotten to its peak of the pandemic yet, but media houses are hardly hit, and they've started laying off people. The journalists, when they have no specialization, they do not have the capabilities to even look elsewhere because they do not have that skill in other fields, then they have to stay at home. What do we do differently as journalists going forward when even your employer lays you off, you look up to another means of survival?
So Mira, that's not an easy question to answer, but I'm sure you have so many members who have the same perspective. So I'm curious to know what you've got to say about this.
Yes, and it's very difficult for all of them, and it's it's easy from the perspective of us sitting in Western countries with secure jobs to be giving lessons, but that's why we're trying to hear from as many organizations as we can, and that's why we are launching this emergency appeal for journalism and media support. So we are asking governments to make sure that all the support and emergencies packages for economy include media and the news and journalism organizations. We are also asking them to project future support, especially for local media. We are also asking funders and donors that support news and journalism to look at models for scaling up the support, and also to make it more flexible and understand that at this point, as Sonny was saying, the programmatic support, for instance, reporting on migrants, also needs to be adjusted to the situation. So we are looking at all these things, but the future is at stake. The future of local media is at stake. And we really need to work long-term together to find models for local journalism to survive. At the moment, advertising as such, even social and digital media are not providing this model. So we need to work with communities, with governments, and with philanthropy to see where that new model is.
Great, thank you so much. We have somebody else on the mic. Oh, nobody yet, I see. I just want to go back to the point, Fred. I thought it was so interesting when you were talking about social media channels and the fact that we might not be exploiting them enough. What we certainly see with RNW media is that, there's a lot of distrust around what is on social media channels. So how do we give them the integrity? Shakira, you mentioned TikTok. It's an interesting new platform used for a variety of reasons, and to use it for news is something that, that we're just seeing the beginnings of. Can you maybe talk about the perception of information and the integrity it has on social media, and how young people and women might be able to use that?
I think it's important, Michelle, to break this down by age group and how different age groups view or perceive either social media and what's credible and what's not credible. For example, if I think of the younger generation, we look to social media for our news. It's the first thing you wake up, and many people, you wake up in the morning and you scroll through your feed. So I think that yes, it's not that things are not credible there. It's that you need to follow credible agencies or credible people or quote credible sources as well. For example, World Health Organization versus someone with a no-name brand on Twitter. But it's also powerful. So for example, the hand washing videos, whether they were posted on Facebook or Twitter, they didn't take off as much as they did on TikTok with people in communities that I work with. So it's very important to be able to package information. And what we're also seeing, I mean, I'm cognizant of the fact that people may lose their jobs, and this is a very difficult time for everyone, but it's also a time for evolution and opportunity. And how do we leverage that?
You know what I'm hearing also, just to, you know, as a subtext to all of this, is the hard work we all have to do as citizens, fact checking, you know, looking at sources, understanding who we're listening to, who are we supporting, what media are we supporting. There's a lot more work. We are no longer passive recipients of media, and we are all creators of media in this world. But we're going to go to open mic now because we have Omnia, who I believe is in Egypt. Omnia, are you there, and would you like to say something to our speakers?
Yes, thank you. I just want to ask about, as inequality top the issues that the world is suffering from. So from the panelists' point of view, how could we stop, how could we maintain shedding lights on inequality issues and other issues under the light of COVID-19 is almost the only news in the social media and the press and every website that is related to news and something. So how do you think life goes on? So if we want to keep our issues alive, how can we could maintain this putting those issues on the agenda? Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Omnia. Mira, would you like to field that one? Or Suni?
Maybe Suni first.
There for everyone. Go ahead, Mira.
It's like all the other issues that are important for those communities who are the most marginalized ones. It is the most difficult battle that we have, but as Shakira said, and Sonia as well, we have this opportunity, and maybe social media is somewhere where we could be looking to ask for a changed way that social media values and incentivizes information sharing and information promoting. So one of the areas I think is looking there to try to have, as they would put it, more nutritious conversations on social media and make them work better for our societies. So that's one of the issues. The other is really what we call multilateralism, and that is we need to engage together with different organizations and also different countries. This is the moment, similar to the moment after the Second World War, when we sat together and decided these are our common humanity values, and this is the world that we are going towards. I think this is one of those moments where, as citizens, as Michelle said, and as Shakira mentioned, we have the obligation to sit together and say, okay, as a humanity, these are the values and these are the things that we will be working towards. And addressing inequality, I think, is on the top of that list.
Great, and now for you, Suni, maybe the question of how can citizens put issues on the media's agenda? You've talked about a couple of strategies, but I think Omnia wants to know, how can we make sure that the things that are most important to us, that citizens are able to push them to the top of the media's agenda?
Yeah, through our practical experiences from our work, not only during the COVID-19, even before COVID-19, what what we've done is like the collective information, especially when the voices come collectively from the ground, that are taken into consideration, not only by media, but also by government representatives and civil society organizations. So I feel like it is very important for people to come collectively and share their voices, then it's heard.
Great, thank you so much, Suni. We have one of your colleagues, Ode from Accountability Lab Nigeria, who's joined us as well. You're on the mic now. Ode, go ahead.
Hi, everyone. A wonderful good day to all the panelists. Glad to be part of this discussion. I'm really excited. So I was just thinking when Fred mentioned social media, and we are talking about giving voice to the people, then I'm looking at the social media users in Nigeria, which stands at 27 million in January 2020. It's increased by 3.4 million between April 2019 and January 2020. Internet penetration stands at 47.1% and projected to grow about 4% in 2023. In 2020, it might be like 65%. So I'm really concerned about the social media usage and how do we give voice to the marginalized groups, people in the rural areas like we know in Nigeria. My thoughts are, I hope with social media in the context of Nigeria or third world, the global South, I'm not sure what the situation would be. Are we excluding more people using social media or are we including more people using social media? That's my thoughts.
Great question. And who would like to respond? Shakira, is this something you would like to respond to?
Thanks, Michelle, and thanks to the person who posed the question as well. Very quickly, I would say that it's twofold. One, yes, we've increased the spread of information and connectivity, but it points to a deeper issue during the pandemic, and that's that our governments have jolted into giving short-term responses. So for example, water tanks to poorer communities, which they haven't done for over 20 years. But it also pushes the question of how do you push longer measures or longer sustainable measures. Right now on the continent, almost 50% of the African continent doesn't have access to internet infrastructure. Now, this should be our call to make sure people are included, not to say we are excluding people, but how do we include people? And we really need to push this because right now, as we move virtually and more digital, people whose jobs are not necessarily able to go virtual and digital are excluded, and we need these longer term measures. That's what I would say, and where we need to advocate.
Great, thank you so much. We also have a question from Naotoshi Nakamura. This one is for Mira. Mira, what could be a new business model for local journalism? I used to be a local newspaper journalist in Japan, but the business was struggling and I had to leave the company. You get all the difficult questions, Mira.
Well, there is no, thank you for a question, but there is no one business model. There is also a comment from Monica here that's related to that. It says basically, shall we ask people to subscribe and contribute to media content? Because if we take everything for free, they will not survive. And that's, I think, part of the answer that we are seeing around the world, and that is relying on membership contributions, subscription contributions, different local philanthropy contributions, and really working with your local people to see what they can afford and how they can afford to support you. Globally, up to 2012, I think the majority of the news operations around the world were supported by advertising. At that point, we had a change, and now the majority of content produced around the world is actually supported by subscriptions. So engagement, engagement, and engagement is the main mantra for a business model. But unfortunately, at this point in time, especially in countries with a low level of income, this is not enough.
Okay, thank you so much, Mira. And thank you very much for all the questions coming in on the mic. We love this. We weren't expecting this. And we have another one. We have Kazin from Iraq. If her audio is up, Kazin, you can put your question or your response out.
Hello.
Hello, hello, welcome.
Thank you for you, and thank you to the speakers. They did well. But here I would like to add some other things about the media and in this situation. I think let's say 18% of media coverage about news about coronavirus. But let's say that now what we or the whole world is not on we suffer is not only coronavirus. It's also in this time, in the time of corona, we also face domestic violence. We also face poverty. So instead of, I think that media exaggerates about handing washers and wearing masks. They should also pay attention to the places that they even don't have water. They even don't have media to see this. So I think instead of exaggerating about taking measures about to respond coronavirus, we also should pay attention to the poverty, because it increases, and domestic violence. So how can we, for example, increase this awareness in media, in our, I don't know which one will answer, but this is my question. Isn't it also a problem that we are facing domestic violence, but no one talks about this?
Really great points, Kazim. I'm gonna throw that one to Shakira, because actually I think this is a really good one in thinking about contextualizing information. So maybe you would like to say something, Shakira?
Thanks, Michelle. I think there was the example I gave earlier around the information on the bread packets and how that could reach a vast majority of the population. So I think we need to be a little bit creative in how we're packaging and disseminating information, one, but then I'd also go on to say that one of my concerns, and linked to inequality, but also some of the questions, is the lack of the human element in the reporting during this time. We're just seeing case rates, we're just seeing deaths, but what does death mean to people? It's cold reporting at the moment. Who's contracting corona? How has it affected their families? Those sort of stories will definitely bring out the inequality, and I hope this would push many of us working in this space to do so.
Great, thank you so much. And maybe if I can say something about the work of RNW Media, I mean, that's really our focus as well, is just understanding the pressures local communities are under and ensuring everything is contextualized. You know, you can't give a message unless you know all the other pressures and also all the language needs, etc., reducing all the barriers to access to this type of information. So I think we also have a question from John David Moncada in the Philippines. How can media engage in pacifying collective anger and grief that is developing among people directed towards the government? That's a fascinating question. Anger and grief that is developing among people directed toward the government. Anybody want to take that on? Certainly something we're seeing, whether you're engaged in citizen engagement or in the media. Soni, you moved your hand, so I'm thinking maybe you want to say something.
Yeah, it's really a tricky question, but you know, when it comes to this pandemic, there has been a lot of cases because of the misinformation. There has been a lack of citizens and government's trust. So it is equally important for government to think on how they can provide the information, like what they are doing, really doing to the ground. Because some of the times what happens is like they're publishing things on website which no one has access to, and they feel like their job is done. But it's really important for government to think about like how they can build trust with their communities and really engage with them.
Great, thank you so much. And we have a great question from Sanjay Sharma, and this is actually the summing up question. We're coming up to the end of this event. Sanjay, you're doing my work for me. How do you envision this crisis will change the role of media, citizens, and activists after the crisis will be over? Any broader perspectives from the government and non-government sectors to join in? So I'm going to put this question to each of you. I'll start with you, Mira. I love it. You know, what do you imagine the change in role will be for the media once this is over?
You put me on the spot there.
We can jump to Sony. Shall I do that? Put you on the spot instead, Sony? What do you think the role of the citizens will be once this pandemic is over?
So I would like to share some practical experiences or practical examples from Nepal. I think for citizens, it will be a time where they have to collectively come together and discuss things with their government. Otherwise, because there are going to be a lot of problems that's going to come up after this corona crisis, like as we already talked, like there's a lot of inequality going to increase. There are a lot of people who is going to be unemployed. So I feel like government and citizens, they need to come together and discuss what are the problems that are existing in the community and try to solve those.
Great, thank you so much. Shakira, a new role for activists once this crisis is over.
I mean, for the past 10 years or so, I've been working in the development space. And what I see is a shift of either funding or focus whenever there's a new topic issue. So for example, climate change or universal health coverage. Now, what COVID-19 could do is just push the focus there for now, and then the world moves on. But what I would like to propose or end off saying, we could have either short-term response efforts, which are incredible and are needed at every single level by every part of society, including civil society. But I want people to think long-term. There's something about the emergency response, but like I said, what can you do? Stop telling a continent that does not have water to wash their hands. Put the water and sanitation in place. Stop telling a continent to go virtual where there's no internet connectivity. Put the infrastructure in place so that by the time the next pandemic comes, we won't be having this discussion. So longer term measures is what I would like to see the entire world moving towards.
Hear, 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 hear. Music to everyone's ears, I think. Mira, what about you? Role of media.
Yes, I think that we will come even closer to cooperating with our citizens and our communities. And I think that some of the comments about COVID reporting not having a human face is something that journalists are also seeing, and our citizens. So I think there will be closer coming together of journalists and their communities. A broader perspective for the government and non-government sectors, especially development. I support absolutely everything that Shakira and Sony just said. From our perspective, we are working with both governmental and private funders to try to set up some long-term mechanisms for funding local news media. So tomorrow we have a launch of the feasibility study on the International Fund for Public Interest Media that was initiated by Luminate Foundation and BBC, a lot of other GFMD members and partners. And so that's one of the initiatives that's looking at local media as a sector that needs a special attention and a special support, not only today in the context of COVID, but in the long term. And we hope we will have enough understanding and enough support from all those in power to support us.
Thank you so much. And great to have the three of you here, really with your pulse on everything. I mean, this is all happening in real time, these changes, and to be able to hear about it with you, share this, and with our participants. You know, as we said at the start, the Hague Talks is about moving ideas forward. And I hope everybody heard strategies today that they will use as food for thought, but also food for action, right? There's a lot of action we can undertake in this. So I want to thank everybody. I'm going to start with our speakers. A big thank you to Mira Milosevic. Thank you so much. Thank you, Sally Canal. Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you
you very much, Shakira Chinara, for joining us today. Yeah, thank you. And a big thank you to all of you who took part. I was so delighted to see so many questions, and apologies to all the people who asked a question that we didn't get a chance to ask today and put to our speakers. But I loved it that we got so many of you on the open mic. Yay. So really wonderful that you took part of your Sunday afternoon to spend it with us. I'm Michelle Ernstine from RNW Media. And again, RNW Media was delighted to partner with Hague Talks for this special event to mark World Press Freedom Day. So let's try and do it again. And because we could do it online, we could talk to many more of you today. So great learning and a big silver lining there. So for me, Stay safe, stay healthy.
Voice to rep. I don't need to be president to be part of my government. My voice is my platform. The goal is to reform. Silence is golden till your conscience gets frozen. Government for the people, no be people for the government. Government by the people, not government buying people. The blame we push around today will come back to torment us. The bridge we failed to fix today will fall upon our children. So I'm asking you to give it all you got. Oh, I'm asking you to give it all you got. Oh, we sabi talk, we dey analyze, yet we fail to realize the power of doing right, good conscience and foresight. Corruption, they our blood, it's taking over like a flood. What's meant for the people should go to the people. No more spectators, don't leave your life on the internet. The blame we push around today will come back to torment us. The bridge you fail to fix today will fall upon your children. So I'm asking you to give it all you got. Give it all you got. Give it all you got. I'm asking you to give it all you got. Give it all you got. Give it all you got. Lawmakers, judiciary, executive, political parties. Now all of us be government, social groups, you and I, CSO.